What is good, everybody? Welcome back to another episode brought to you by the League FFB. We've been going through over the last week or so, kind of updating these initial redraft rankings for you guys for your fantasy football drafts here in 2025. Last week, we started with the big hitter positions. We did the running backs and the wide receivers. This week, we're going to be doing the quarterbacks and the tight ends. So in this video, I'm going to be going through my top 30 quarterbacks for fantasy football in those redraft leagues, like I said. So make sure you guys are subscribed to this channel. That way you don't miss any future content. But without wasting any more time, let's hop right into today's video and let's start talking about these quarterbacks. All right, so I got about 7 tiers today to get through all of my top 30 guys. We're going to be kicking it off in that elite quarterback 1 tier with my QB1. It is going to be Lamar Jackson. Look, this is a player who had 16 top 12 finishes in 2024. That's the most ever by a quarterback for fantasy purposes. He ranked first in passer rating, yards per attempt, and fantasy points per dropback. So he had a very elite season with those efficiency metrics, and so it's everything you really wanted to see. On top of that, he added 915 rushing yards on the ground, which is obviously where you get a ton of fantasy football points. Look, he's a perfect fit for this Todd Monken offense. I think he's an elite fantasy game breaker, and there's really not much I can say about Lamar Jackson that hasn't been said. He's my QB1 this year. Going on to my QB2, the only other guy in this elite QB1 tier, it is going to be Josh Allen. 5 straight top 4 fantasy quarterback seasons in a row for Josh Allen. He did it in 2024 without a top 30 fantasy wide receiver or without a top 10 tight end. That's the first time in years that has happened. He's a dominant rusher of the football, just 10 touchdowns away from Cam Newton's all-time quarterback rushing touchdown record, so he's probably going to be getting that here in 2025. This is a player who has an elite weekly floor and ceiling, especially with Buffalo's red zone usage and how they use Josh Allen on the goal line in some of those situations. Let's go on to my tier 2. My tier 2 is going to have 3 quarterbacks. We'll start it off with my QB3. It's going to be Jalen Hurts. He had 11 rushing touchdowns inside the 5-yard line last year. That was the second most in the NFL, only behind Kyren Williams. Now that accounted for about 51% of the Eagles inside the 5 carries, despite Saquon Barkley's presence in this offense. Now the tush push, it's still around. It did not get banned this offseason. And last year he had the most fantasy points ever by a quarterback with less than 375 passing attempts. So he is consistently elite and locked in as a top 5 option in my rankings in fantasy football scoring, even with this being a low passing volume type of offense. So Jalen Hurts is still elite and a top 3 quarterback in my rankings. Going on to QB4, I want to talk about Joe Burrow. Joe Burrow was the quarterback 1 last year from weeks 9 on in 2024. He had multiple 250 plus yard games with 3+ touchdowns in each of those games as well. He tied the NFL record for 248 completions in an 8-game span. Now he has an elite wide receiver duo there with Jamar Chase and T. Higgins. Both of those guys have been locked up long term now, and because of that, this is probably going to remain a pass heavy offense with a bad defense, so there's potential for lots of shootouts in this year's team, just like there was last year as well. So even though Joe Burrow is not really a rusher of the football, he does enough with his leg and he has enough throws in the red zone where I think he can still remain an elite option for us in fantasy football. Let's move on to my QB5. That's going to be Jayden Daniels. Jayden Daniels took the Commanders to the NFC Championship as a rookie with 75 scrambles, most in the modern era, ranked 5th in fantasy points per dropback last year. So really came out of the gates hot last year as a rookie, did a lot with his legs, and we knew he could do that coming into the NFL. Now he is a quick and accurate passer. He had the 4th fastest release and 3rd in adjusted completions on quick throws last year. So this is a guy who's probably priced at his ceiling. There's still room for growth potentially if you think that the Commanders offense can take a step forward with the added weapon of Deebo Samuel. If you don't believe it too much, I still think the floor is very, very high for Jayden Daniels, and he comes in as my QB5. Moving on to my tier 3, I got a total of 3 quarterbacks in this tier as well, and these are the solid QB1s. I'm going to put Bo Nix as my QB6. Now, this is a player who threw for 29 touchdowns in 2024. That was the second most ever by a rookie quarterback, and he finished as the QB10 in fantasy football. Now, he led Denver to their first playoff appearance since 2015. 62% of his targets were under 10 yards, so he had the 4th highest checkdown rate in the NFL as a rookie. I think this is a player who offers a very high weekly floor. He has the ability to give you some of the rushing upside, averaging about 25 rushing yards per game last year, and he's very accurate. Probably a player who can even take another step forward this year, and somebody I'm banking on making a little bit of a breakout, even though he had a breakout last year as a rookie. So let's go to my QB7. This is where we're going to put Patrick Mahomes. The story last year was very, very evident. No top 12 weekly finishes until week 9 of the NFL season. Only 23.5% of the games that he played played in scored over 20 fantasy points. So those were career lows for him in yards per attempt, and touchdown rate. But everything that we've heard so far this offseason is that the Chiefs, they reportedly want to open up this offense a little bit more in 2025, get back to airing out that football a little bit. And he has some weapons here with a healthy Rashee Rice, Xavier Worthy in year 2, Travis Kelce, and hopefully a healthy Isaiah Pacheco here, where we can see this offense really take a step forward. So this is probably the cheapest ADP you have gotten of Patrick Mahomes over the course of his career. So if you want to bet on a bounce back player of value, Patrick Mahomes is maybe going to be that guy, unless one of your league mates is just drafting off of name value, which is very likely with Patrick Mahomes. But I think he's a decent value in drafts this year as a bounce back candidate. Let's go to my last player in this tier. I'm going to talk about Kyler Murray. Kyler Murray had just 3 top 5 finishes in 2024, despite having the highest scramble rate since 2020 with 6.5%. This is a player who's very strong in play action. He's very good over the middle of the field, but he was bottom 5 against the blitz last year, which is obviously not anything we want to see. I think the chemistry with Marvin Harrison Jr. needs to get a little bit better. That's something we expect to happen a little bit here in year 2, but I think Kyler Murray still has top 5 upside, especially if he runs a little bit more and this offense starts to click with a breakout from Marvin Harrison Jr. Moving on to my tier 4, I want to talk about these low end QB1s, but coming in as my QB9, I do have Baker Mayfield of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. This is a player who threw for 4,500 yards and 41 touchdowns in 2024. He had 8 top 5 fantasy finishes, which was the most among all fantasy quarterbacks last year. So on top of that, he added nearly 400 rushing yards, and this is a team that has a loaded supporting cast. Now, there are going to be some guys recovering from injuries, Chris Godwin this year, but even with the injury concerns, they added Emeka Egbuka in the offseason in the NFL draft, a first-round wide receiver. So I'm not really even concerned about the supporting cast at all here in Tampa Bay. Now, there is an offensive coordinator change. Liam Cohen goes to the Jacksonville Jaguars. How is that going to affect Baker Mayfield? I don't really know, but I'm still betting on Baker Mayfield to be a guy that continues proving the doubters wrong and finishes as a strong quarterback 1 here in fantasy football for your 2025 fantasy football teams. Let's go to my quarterback 10. I'm going to kick it off with Dak Prescott. This is a player who had a season end very early in 2024. Week 9, had that hamstring injury, didn't play the rest of the year. But this is also a player that was the quarterback 3 overall just a year prior in 2023. He has been a top 12 fantasy football quarterback in every full season of his career that he's played where he hasn't dealt with injury. And I think having that stable play caller, that familiarity that you've had from Brian Schottenheimer going to the offensive coordinator to the head coaching role, I think there's a lot of things to like about that as far as a consistency type of thing. And then you have the potential shootouts here with this defense on Dallas getting a little bit weaker this season. So yes, there's probably concern that the rushing upside isn't there with Dak Prescott, especially after some of the injuries that he has suffered. But I also think they have a very weak early season schedule, and I think that makes him a value and a player that, like I said, when healthy, has been a top 12 fantasy quarterback pretty much every single year. Let's go to quarterback 11. I got Jordan Love. Jordan Love started the 2025 season off hot with an 8% touchdown rate, but then that cratered all the way down to quarterback 30 in fantasy points per game from week 8 on. Now, obviously, I think the reason for this was there was some injuries for Jordan Love that he was kind of battling through. Also, the fact that the Green Bay Packers don't have a dominant wide receiver target or a receiving target in general. No wide receiver or tight end saw over a 20% target share. They hope that they fix that with Matthew Golden going into this year, but that could take some time. I still think that Jordan Love is in a good system here under Matt LaFleur. If the touchdown rate bounces back to 5+% this year, I think he's a very safe player for a quarterback 1 finish in 2025. Moving on to my quarterback 12, I am going to round out these low-end QB1s with Jared Goff. This is a player who had 4,600 plus passing yards, 35 plus passing touchdowns, and 14 wins for the Detroit Lions. That's MVP level production, and he didn't win the award. At the end of the day, this is also a player that has finished as a top 10 quarterback for 3 straight years. Now, the thing is, they lost offensive coordinator Ben Johnson. That has kind of relied heavily on play action before. We saw about 37% of those plays being play action, and he has shredded man coverage because of that. How is this Jared Goff, Ben Johnson departure going to affect him? I don't know if it's going to affect him that much. The good news is that last year, some of those home road splits that we've seen with Jared Goff traditionally, those did get narrowed down in 2024, but I do think that this is a player that does have a high floor for fantasy fantasy football as a starter, still somebody I have as a low-end QB1 despite the departure of Ben Johnson. Let's go into my tier 5. Tier 5, I'm going to my quarterback 2s that I do think have some upside to give you some spikes here and there. Let's kick it off with QB 13, Justin Fields. Look, Justin Fields going to the New York Jets last year averaged 18.9 fantasy points per game and 39 rushing yards in his 6 starts for the Pittsburgh Steelers. 43% of his career fantasy points have come from the rushing abilities of Justin Fields. So when he is the starting quarterback, he's running the football, and when he's running the football, he's scoring you points. I think this is a discounted quarterback option for you if you want to bet on rushing upside, but we've seen it before. Justin Fields cannot be the most reliable quarterback for you for your NFL franchise, but for fantasy football, obviously a very good high-end rushing upside type of bet that you can make. Let's go to my quarterback 14, Justin Herbert. Last year, he had career highs in quarterback rating, yards per attempt, and rushing attempts for the Los Angeles Chargers. He had 8 top 12 finishes from week 8 on, only second to Lamar Jackson in that span. Now, the thing is, he had a playoff meltdown. I think a lot of what everybody has remembered from Justin Herbert is the 4 interceptions that he threw in that playoff game. But despite that, the upside still remains the same with Justin Herbert, and they added some more weapons on this offense. So maybe there's some room for improvement for this team in efficiency overall. So Justin Herbert's still a top 15 guy in my ranks. Let's go to Caleb Williams. He comes in as QB 15. This is a player who led the NFL in sacks last year with 68 sacks taken. And on top of that, he also led the NFL in throwaways with 41. So he was either getting sacked or throwing the football away. And really what that tells me is the offensive line was poor. He was holding the ball too long sometimes. We've seen that happen on tape in college. But at the end of the day, this is a team that improved their offensive line going into 2025. And despite some of the bad play last year, this is also a player who still had 5 top 6 weekly finishes, even if some of those did come in garbage time. Now, at the end of the day, I do expect this offense to take a big leap under head coach Ben Johnson, but I will warn you that the ADP for Caleb Williams already has that baked into his cost. So you're not really getting a value. You're not buying a breakout. The breakout is baked in, so it almost feels like he has to break out for the ADP to pay off this season. Let's go to my quarterback 16. I'm going to talk about Brock Purdy of the 49ers. He had a QB 12 finish in 2024. That was boosted by the 5 rushing touchdowns that he had, which was abnormal from Brock Purdy. We haven't really seen that before. The touchdown rate did drop to 4.4%, and a lot of those yak yards did dry up last year as well. Now, that is also because this team was banged up, hurt. A lot of the options weren't available. Ayuk, CMC, things like that. This is a player who I do think has a solid floor. I think he has some rushing upside, and he does play on a favorable team with a good play caller in Kyle Shanahan. I think the thing is, these weapons are going to need to stay healthy. Yes, I'm looking at you, CMC, if we want to have a good season from Brock Purdy and have him get back into that top 12 QB1 type of performances. Let's go to Drake May. Drake May comes in as my QB 17. This is a player who did not start until week 6 of the NFL season, but after he got the starting job, he posted 4 top 12 finishes on the year as a rookie. He averaged 37 rushing yards per game in those 11 full games that he played in, which is very rare for rookies, so we love to see that rushing upside overall. Has better weapons in 2025, a new coaching staff in 2025, and I think these things can be viewed as potential reasons why we could have a breakout from Drake May here as a sophomore during his second year of his NFL career. Let's go to number 18, J.J. McCarthy. J.J. McCarthy, he's coming off of a meniscus tear. Obviously, he's now locked in as the Vikings starter. He was surrounded by elite weapons last year going into the season. Strong play caller in Kevin O'Connell. We saw that pay off for Sam Darnold, who stepped in as the starter. Vikings quarterbacks over the last 3 years have ranked 8th overall in total fantasy points per game. So if you believe that Kevin O'Connell and that Vikings quarterback carousel of Nick Mullins, Joshua Dobbs, Kirk Cousins, Sam Darnold, if you think JJ McCarthy can do what they have done, they've ranked 8th overall in fantasy total points. So I think that's a strong indicator to JJ McCarthy breaking out as a sophomore. Let's go to my last player in this tier, 19. It's going to be CJ Stroud. This is a player who had just 2 top 10 finishes in 2024, had a lot of offensive line issues, and there were some wide receiver injuries there too. Tank Dell, Nico Collins, Stephon Diggs, you name it. Bad year for the Houston Texans. On top of that, Stroud only added 1.1 fantasy points per game with his legs, showing you that he has a very limited fantasy football ceiling from a rushing standpoint. The passing touchdown rate is going to be key if CJ Stroud is going to bounce back here this year, but I think it's coming at a discounted price in 2025 in drafts. So if you want to bet on that returning back to that rookie season form for CJ Stroud, which I do think is a little bit of a tough ask, I think that's the bet you're going to be making in drafts, and he comes in as my quarterback 19. Let's go to my tier 6. My tier 6 is the fringe quarterback 2s, and I'm going to kick it off with quarterback 20, Trevor Lawrence. And I'll be honest here, Trevor Lawrence, I debated at the back end of this upper tier, that QB2s with upside. I debated him there. I debated him here. I just can't really tell you where I really want to put him. He's in between for the most part. But the reason why I leaned down here is because of one stat specifically. And that's that Trevor Lawrence only has one top 12 finish over his 4 seasons of his NFL career. Only one time he's been a QB1 in those 4 years. It's not great. Obviously, new head coach Liam Cohen could be the spark to kind of help Trevor Lawrence revive his career here. Just look at what Baker did last year in 2024. And he is surrounded by some explosive young wide receivers in Travis Hunter and Brian Thomas Jr. And on top of that, he gets a pretty easy opening schedule this season. So he is a high upside swing if you do believe in the Jags offense making a jump. I think you could argue he does belong in the back of this tier. But right now, I'm going to put him here. I'll believe it when I see it with Trevor Lawrence. I want to believe it, Trevor. Please show me. Going on to my next player, 21, Tua Tagovailoa. This is a player who had the NFL best 72.9% completion rate, but 26% of his throws were behind the line of scrimmage. So it does feel like that completion percentage is a little bit gimmicky from Tua Tagovailoa. Just one of his passes went for 20 plus air yards after week 12 of the NFL season. No rushing upside with Tua. He's not going to run the football, and he's also a major injury risk. You guys know that. I don't need to tell you that. So I think this is a player who's draftable only if you like his early season matchups, but you also are probably going to have to draft a backup plan as well because there is a decent chance that Tua misses time each and every year. And I think at this point in his career, there's also a chance that any concussion could be the final concussion for Tua Tagovailoa, and it might be wraps on the career as a whole. So very, very risky. Probably the riskiest quarterback pick of all fantasy football quarterback picks this year. Let's go to quarterback 22. I'm going to go with Michael Penix Jr. This is a player who took over for Kirk Cousins late in the year last year. He did flash in that week 18 matchup where he had 312 passing yards and 3 touchdowns. Now he only had a 58% completion rate and he does have very little rushing upside. So I think because of that, the fantasy football ceiling for Michael Penix is much lower than people actually want to admit. He has a big arm, which is good news for guys like Drake London, but I do think he's a volatile low-end quarterback too for your fantasy football teams, just with the lack of some of those fantasy football variables that you need to have to be that high-end type of guy. Let's go to my quarterback 23. I have Geno Smith. This is a player who lands in Las Vegas after career best numbers in Seattle, minus the touchdowns, only having a 3.6 touchdown rate there last year for the Seahawks. He reunites with a familiar coaching staff here with Pete Carroll, and he gets an upgraded offense for this Raiders team that now adds Ashton Jeanty, Brock Bowers, Jacoby Myers, Jack Besh. And I think because of that, Geno's going to benefit. He's a very solid game manager type of profile, and I think he has the path to being a steady QB2 if that touchdown rate does rebound here in 2025. Let's go to 24. That is going to be Bryce Young for me. Bryce Young, he kind of revived that back half of the season under Dave Canales. I think really what it came down to is from week 12 on, he was a top 7 quarterback in fantasy points per dropback, and he was second in scrambles. So he was using his legs. The thing is, there's still a poor supporting cast here. They add Teterow and McMillan, which I do like, but it does feel like this is still a little bit of a weaker supporting cast. That strong finish, though, does give us some hope for growth here in year 3. But overall, this is still a risky quarterback pick, but I think there is some sneaky upside if you want to try and buy the breakout here with a true X-alpha type of wide receiver in Tet McMillan. Let's go to my quarterback 25. I'm going to have Matthew Stafford, and he's the last quarterback in this tier for me. You know what you're getting with Stafford, a decent floor, probably a capped ceiling at this point in time in his career. There's no rushing upside. He does have a few big games a year, but they're not super often. The arm isn't the same as it used to be, but he is a safe-ish player when he's healthy. I think overall, this is a Rams team that's starting to lean on the defense a little bit more. They're leaning on their run game a little bit more. So Stafford, he's probably more of a matchup play than he is a weekly start, but adding Devontae Adams to this offense does hope that there is a little bit of a higher spike week potential in this team's overall ability, and maybe Matthew Stafford finds your lineup a few weeks in the right matchups. Let's go to my tier 7. Tier 7 is going to be the final tier. These are the QB3s that all have risk. Kicking it off at the top of the tier, Cam Ward, rookie quarterback for the Tennessee Titans. He is a raw, exciting type of rookie. I think he has the tools that you look for: size, mobility, big arm, all of these things that check the boxes. And he had some big college numbers, but I do think at the end of the day, he's probably a player that will struggle early on because there is a lack of weapons here in Tennessee that he can rely on. There is some rushing upside with him. I do think it's a bonus to his game. He's not necessarily a player that's going to be featured in the run game like Lamar or Jalen Hurts or even Jayden Daniels, but I do think he can use his legs kind of similar to a guy like Baker Mayfield does. Now with Cam Ward, obviously there's some long-term intrigue with him, but I just don't think you're going to be able to trust him in your lineup early on in the season. maybe not at all as a rookie. So he's probably somebody that I'm not going to be drafting unless I need a high upside swing, which maybe Cam Ward can be viewed as such. Let's go on to my next guy. It's going to be quarterback 27. I have Sam Darnold here. He shocked everybody in 2024. He had 4,300 passing yards and 35 touchdowns, finishing as the quarterback 8. Now he heads to Seattle here, but this offense isn't the same offense as the Minnesota Vikings offense. This offense is built to run, not throw the football 600 times to guys like Justin Jefferson and Jordan Addison and TJ Hawkinson. And I do think that Kevin O'Connell made him fantasy football relevant. This is a new situation. It's less favorable than the one that he was in. And so even though those things are true for Sam Darnold, I don't think it's necessarily a bad stash quarterback type of pick, but I don't think I'm counting on Sam Darnold by any means to repeat anywhere close to what he did last year with the Minnesota Vikings. Let's move on to my quarterback 28. I got Aaron Rodgers for the Pittsburgh Steelers. 41 years old now, offers really nothing for you on the ground at all. And I do think he has a weak receiving core outside of DK Metcalf. So Pittsburgh offense is very likely to be run heavy under Arthur Smith. And that's kind of been true throughout the entirety of Arthur Smith's play calling career. So I do think the ceiling of Aaron Rodgers is severely capped. And that's even if he starts all year. It would not shock me if Aaron Rodgers ends up getting benched if he's playing poorly for a guy like Will Howard, because quite honestly, this is the end of the road for Aaron Rodgers. Now moving on to quarterback 29, Russell Wilson. Speaking of quarterbacks that could get benched, this is a player that's expected to start for the Giants for now, but he's a bridge quarterback on a bottom tier offense that did rank 31st in scoring last year. He also has nothing really left as far as rushing ability, and I do think that Jackson Dart is sitting here waiting in the wings, ready to get his number called, and when he does, they're not going to look back to Russell Wilson at any point in time. If you're drafting Russell Wilson, you're probably not drafting a player that is going to finish the year on your roster. Now, maybe you're not thinking about that at the draft, but this is a player that I'm really not targeting unless you're in super deep, super flex type of formats. And now moving on to my final quarterback in today's video, it is going to be number 30, Tyler Shough. The 26-year-old rookie has a very questionable NFL outlook. He's inheriting this Saints starting job post Derek Carr, and it is a very brutal offense with not a lot to like long term. I think right now with new head coach Kellen Moore, there's going to be a lot of work to be done. There's really not a lot that I look at this situation and think fantasy football numbers are going to be spewing out of this offense. And Vegas seems to think the same thing. They're projecting them to be a very, very bad team, probably competing for the 101 in next year's NFL draft. So for me, Tyler Shough, he's basically undraftable. And that's going to remain true for me unless something entirely out of the ordinary, super dramatic happens with the Saints. And even then, I don't expect that to happen. So Tyler Shough for me right now, probably an undraftable pick, but still creeps into my top 30. All right, folks. So there you have it. That is my top 30 quarterback rankings as we get into redraft season here this year. Obviously, these rankings are going to change and update as we get new news in NFL training camp over the next week or 2 weeks, plus all of the things that are going to happen over the next month. I think at this time, if you're not subscribed to the channel, you're doing yourself a disservice. So make sure you go hit that subscribe button. That way you never miss a future video. We are trying to help you guys win your fantasy football championships here in 2025. We do everything year round. Dynasty, redraft, all of that good stuff. So there's going to be something for you on this channel that can satisfy your fantasy football appetite. So make sure you're here. Also, if you like the content, hit the like button and go join our free Discord. We do have a free Discord linked in the description, helping you guys with those fantasy football teams 24/7, 365. And like I said, it's free to join, so there is no risk in doing that. But with all of that out of the way, I have nothing else for you guys today. So I will see you on our next episode. But until then, peace out.